Knitting tension, how to knit with ease. Hello, I'm Kristen and welcome back to my channel Studio Knit. So knitting tension is how evenly the yarn feeds into your knitted work from the yarn ball. Our goal is to have a moderate, even tension throughout our knitting, both while casting on and while knitting. There are a few good reasons we do not want our knitting tension to be too tight or too loose. For starters, your knitted piece will look its best when you're knitting with an even tension. Otherwise, your work may have stitches that are a mix of tall, short, tight, loose, resulting in looking pretty wonky. It's really common for beginning knitters to start casting on and knitting too tightly. You'll know that you're knitting your stitches too tightly when it's really hard to insert your needle into your stitches. Remember, your stitches cannot be any smaller than your knitting needle size, right? So there's no need for your yarn to squeeze those needles. Just lightly wrap your yarn around your needles so it's touching all the way around, but not holding on for dear life. Test out your stitches to see if they can move along your needle like this without too much effort. Your hands will thank you. Knitting really tightly, it often results in stressed out hands. If you feel your hands are starting to hurt from knitting, just try to knit a little bit looser, and you also might want to take breaks and do some hand exercises and a bit of massage. Before knitting, you also might want to check your mood. If you are stressed out or angry, you may tend to knit on the tighter side. So when you're ready to knit, take this opportunity to check in with yourself, take a breath, and just relax into your knitting. Knitting loosely, it's not quite as common for beginning knitters, but it can happen. So just make sure your yarn is holding on to your knitting needle and it's not looping around really loosely with a lot of space between. Test out your stitches to make sure the yarn is holding on to your needles, but not in huge open loops. Oh, and if this video has been helpful to you, please do me a favor, like it up. It really helps me out. The perfect knitting tension. Again, an even, steady, moderate tension, it's your goal. So while knitting, make sure your yarn is wrapped around the needle, hugging it with a nice, even tension. Getting into a rhythm with your knitting is helpful too. If you find yourself getting interrupted, putting down your knitting needles a lot between your stitches, your tension might become uneven. Personally, I like to keep a really nice steady rhythm with my knitting, and of course a slow rhythm is perfectly fine. I also try to complete my knitting stitches along the row, not putting it down until I have completed that entire row. Once you've gotten into your rhythm and been knitting for a little while, you'll find yourself naturally knitting evenly. You found your groove and you're no longer thinking about it. Checking tension with a gauge swatch. I just wanted to quickly mention that as you start to check out knitting patterns, you'll start to see a mention of checking your gauge with a knitted swatch. This is a way to determine if you're knitting with the correct tension, needle, yarn size to make a project a specific size. I feel this is not something you need to concern yourself with right now. I just wanted you to be aware that there are knitting projects that require correct sizing. So in the future, you will be creating a little swatch that is checking your tension. But for now, just have fun knitting as evenly as possible. Check out my entire Absolute Beginner Knitting series to get started knitting now, available on Teachable. Thanks so much for watching, and I will see you next time, guys. Bye!